Hi, this is Jason Bomer with LA Networks. I'm the principal engineer here. We're a Los Angeles-based gold partner. And today in ACI for Network Engineers, we're going to be covering naming standards. Now, although I said at the very beginning of this series, this wasn't really meant to be an architectural series, but more of a tactical series. This is a fairly architectural discussion, though. However, you're going to find that in ACI, the object model is so ingrained into what we do that you have to think ahead of time about what you're doing, what you're creating, what you're naming, because those names are going to stick with you. And you're going to need some kind of systematic approach that allows you to recognize, a policy from a policy group, for example, and interface policy from a switch policy, right? So today we'll be going over that. We're not going to be on the APIC console today. Instead, we're going to be going through an Excel spreadsheet I created. Now, you don't have to use Excel. I just happen to be very comfortable in Excel. If you prefer to do it in Visio or Notepad++ or Microsoft Word or some other program, does not matter. But you might want to just take a look at my thought process, because I think that's the more critical component rather than the specific way I happen to have done it. You ultimately need to find the methodology that's going to work for you and your company. That being said, let's go ahead and get to it.
Okay, so today we're going to be taking a look at naming conventions in ACI. As I mentioned in the intro, the format that you want to use may well differ. You should take this really as just a guide as to what we're trying to accomplish in this step, not as necessarily a letter of the law on how you want to name items or how you want to document it. The big takeaways are you do want to document it. You want a process that's repeatable quite easily, that makes sense to you within your company and your infrastructure, right? So we'll take care of the easy ones first, okay? And I just have this set up as a simple uh, spreadsheet, right? Object description, name, that means basically the standard or generic name, an example of how that name's applied, and any notes that might go in there, right? So in this case, for example, I say, okay, I need some host names for my devices, right? And in this case, I went with, site code underscore site location. And what that really means is when I put in an underscore, this is just me. This is just Jason's speak here. To me, an underscore usually means that it's one long string. I'm just putting the underscore in so you understand what fields make up that string. So site code underscore site location in our case translates to LAXDC, meaning I have a site code called LAX and the location happens to be the data center. So maybe it's a colo facility or something like that, or an on-prem data center, doesn't matter. But in our case, my site code site location is LAXDC. The spine number, and here we went with spine 101, so that number maps to the node ID that I gave it during the fabric discovery, if you recall that video. And then -SW for switch, because the spine is a switch, the leaf is a switch, and you can see this is LAXDC leaf 201-SW, LAXDC APIC 1-CT. In this case, CT stands for controller. If you don't like that, you could call it something else. So um, those are the equivalent of host names. Now let's get into some real interesting object names, right? So as I mentioned before in previous videos, talked about this in the NTP one in particular, policy group, profile. We run into those all the time. So I want to really give some deep thought to policy group, and profile. Okay. So I did type underscore Paul dash purpose dash settings. So for an interface policy group, that'd be int Paul dash speed dash auto. This is an individual policy that's setting the speed to auto detect. Okay. I'd also have maybe like int Paul, LACP dash active, right? And remember when we did NTP, we did a pod Paul, right? So here we've got pod Paul dash NTP dash on. And that's effectively just saying that we're taking our NTP and turning it to on in the pod policies, right? And then my policies get called in a policy group. So I have a similar naming structure for my policy group, right? Type policy group purpose setting, int pol group for interface policy group standard VPC. This is the policy group for my standard VPC. Maybe I have non-standard VPCs, they wouldn't use this one, right? Pod pol group NTP. Here I don't really have a setting, so I left that off, okay? Pod pol group dash NTP. And that brings up a good point. Whatever your naming standard is, you do want some flexibility in there because although these objects get called a lot of times, like policy, policy group, profile, they may mean slightly different things in different areas, right? Or they might, I shouldn't say mean, but they might be utilized in different ways in different areas. So make it flexible enough that it makes sense. Don't be so rigid that, you know, that you feel like you have to populate something, for example, that maybe just would confuse people. Profile, if you recall, is where I apply things, right? So if it was a switch profile, in my case, I did prof-leaf 201, prof-spine 101. You probably rarely ever set a spine profile, but that's okay. Maybe it's an interface, right? prof-int-e9 or prof-int-e13 to 14, okay? Again, the critical part here is not how I'm naming these, it's that I do it in a rather systematic way, right? And that's what I really want you to get from this video is to think about this, spend some time thinking about this, and thankfully in here you can see I've kind of called out some of the objects you're going to need to name, right? So the two other ones we'll cover right now are pools and domains. Uh, Pools mean basically VLAN pools, right? You could have a VLAN pool of a single VLAN if you just needed one VLAN, or you could have a VLAN pool of many VLANs if you need many. And domains, basically, you could have a physical domain. This is what I'm connecting to. So like a physical appliance, like a bare metal server or NTP network appliance or something. I could have virtual appliances, like if I'm connecting to a virtual distributed switch, right? And then I could have L3 or L2. Now, this is interesting. Normally for me, I'm all dashes and all lowercase. It's just easier for me to type. I do have exceptions. You can see down here, L's, when I type in those, I capitalize them. The reason I capitalize them is because a lowercase L looks an awful lot like a 1 to me. So again, that's just coming back to being flexible, okay? So anyway, this gives you an item to kind of look at, and you probably want to come up and think about this a little bit on your own fabric. And this is going to be a living document. It's going to be an evolving document. As ACI evolves, you're going to find new objects coming in and old objects going out. So this is a living document that you're going to update from time to time, but this should at least get you started. Thanks for watching. As always, if you have any recommendations, please let me know.